The best way I've ever heard brand explained to me is it is the sum of every single experience that someone has with your company. There is such a proliferation of AI startups right now that I don't care what category you're in, there's a good chance you have 5 to 10 to 50 to 100 competitors. Most B2B companies already sound and look exactly like their other dozen competitors. And then when you take out like not really investing in brand, like you end up with some really unfortunate outcomes.
On this topic of brand, this has been a conversation that I have been very passionate about for my entire kind of career as a marketer. This belief that and this strong conviction that brand is everything in consumer marketing. And yet when we come to B2B, so often, we have these high aspirations for building brand, investing in brand, and yet the investment will always go to demand, or at least certainly there's tension. We hear kind of the brand versus demand language kind of more broadly. And this conversation today, I'm really excited is to dive into that tension. But beyond that, to actually look at real data that we can have some conversation and dialogue around to understand the intersection of our brand ambition and the sort of demand realities that we're living in as marketers. So to have this conversation, I'm extremely excited to introduce Bill Macaitis. He is he's led marketing for 3 of the fastest growing SaaS companies literally in history. You might have heard of them: Slack, Zendesk, and Salesforce. And what's really interesting about his kind of toolkit as a marketer, he spanned everything from product-led growth to selling into the enterprise to building category-defining brands. He's had 5 exits across his career. And today, Bill spends time advising a small number of AI companies, SaaS companies, folks that are thinking about how to build long-term capital-efficient growth, doing this over the extent of years. And so I'm really excited. He and a couple other folks have co-led this new research effort that we're going to talk about today, having engaged, I think, 168 different B2B CMOs at the intersection of brand and demand, and particularly how it impacts budget and investment. So with all that being said, let me go ahead and bring up to the stage Bill.
Awesome.
How's it going?
Hey, Anthony. Thanks so much for having me on the show today. Was super excited to talk about this.
Of course. Thanks so much for being here. And I've been a longtime fan, first time conversation here, and especially around this topic that I think is near and dear to both of our hearts. So I'm looking forward to diving in with you on it. Thanks for being a part of it.
No, of course. This is one of those like really hot button sensitive topics, right? That I think anyone in B2B marketing has struggled with, right? And what people want to do versus what they actually do, there's this massive disconnect. And I think that was something that was just really fascinating for us as we, wanted to survey folks and really find out like what was causing these decisions, what were people actually allocating. So yeah, super interesting.
Awesome. Well, before we get to the research, I want to maybe just get to know you a little bit better in context here. You've led marketing at these incredible, iconic companies that we all look up to as marketers, but in the industry at large. Very different companies, all sort of rooted in kind of these incredible brands that have shaped how we work today. When you think back to your sort of in-house operating roles, kind of within those businesses, what did like great marketing look like to you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like I was listening to your kind of intro there, and you had mentioned like in consumer, brand is everything, right? And I spent 15 years in consumer before I went over to B2B. And like you said, it's a very different playbook. And I would argue it's a very old playbook in a lot of cases. Like when I first came to B2B, I was a little bit shocked with, it felt like the playbook was send out a press release, buy off an analyst or try to like spend as much as you can on analysts and, hold up a bunch of events and, you're good to go. Do your outbound selling, cold calling, and marketing is just there to generate some leads where they can. And I just was like kind of growing up in all these different intersections of B2C, like so many of the tactics and strategies that were being used there weren't being used in B2B. Right. So for me, like to answer your question, like at least from my perspective, what is great marketing look like? I think one is just an acknowledgement that, hey, the strategy is always changing. Like go to market
Yes.
marketing, there are innovations every year, right? And of course, we're in the golden age of innovation right now with AI.
Yeah.
So every single thing is being disrupted, and how you do it, how you think about it. Um, but I do think, like, kind of recognizing, hey, it's always evolving. I think B, having a team that kind of recognizes that it is evolving and there are new functions that are going to come out. And we have to think about how these teams work together, how we can create more cross pollination. I think the
Yeah.
metrics are super important, right? Like metrics drive performance, metrics incentivize folks, right? If you have the wrong
Mm.
metrics, you're going to a lot of times get skewed to an older playbook, right?
Mm.
So I think great marketing also has the right metrics there, and I think too, just an appreciation that, hey, people have emotional connections with these brands,
Mm.
right? And it goes far beyond just your demand gen or your SEM efforts, right? Like these are, I once, the best way I've ever heard brand explained to me is it is the sum of every single experience that someone has with your company,
Right.
right?
Wow.
And that's everything. That's the website, the first salesperson, contact, when they reach out to support, when they're getting onboarded in the product, right?
Mm.
And, when you really start to think about it from that way, a lot of times B2B, historically, we polluted those experiences. We were like, hey, you want to watch the video of what we do? No, no, no. You got to fill out like a 20-page form. You want to
Right.
read any other piece of content? No, it's gated. The
Yes.
minute you show any pulse of interest, we're going to harass you and call you and tell you to buy. The minute you buy, everyone's going to run away and you're going to get assigned like 1/1000th of a customer success manager.
Right.
The product's going to be super hard to use. Oh, but by the way, we'd love for you to go out and recommend it to 20 other people, right? But like, you've polluted the experience, right? So I think, like, that was everything that kind of shaped my, like, what is great marketing. Like, I do think we have to think about, like, hey, how are we delivering great experiences? And
Yeah.
even beyond like the typical marketing areas, the website, the kind of top of funnel stuff, like how can we work with other teams to also make sure they're delivering a great experience too?
Yeah, so good. And that gated content example, I think, is a good one to kind of frame around this tension of, hey, we want to create an incredible experience. We look up to Airbnb and these kind of incredible
Yeah.
consumer brands. How do we kind of bring that into our audience, to our go to market? But we got that pipeline number we got to hit.
Yeah.
We have like old metrics, old, maybe not old, but like there's a cognitive reference that the board has around how to measure
Yes.
marketing. And so we think about like top of funnel in terms of conversion and maybe database growth or some of these kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, legacy or now soon maybe becoming archaic leading indicators. And so I'm curious, from and maybe even your vantage point from the kind of previous, from those experiences, but how did you navigate that tension of short-term pipeline pressure, revenue pressure, and longer term kind of brand building?
Yeah, I think you hit one of the key areas, is that the executive leadership and really the board, right? Like, what is their cognition of what marketing is? What metrics do they have or should they have?
Hmm.
And I think a lot of it, if they lean towards the really short term metrics. So I always said, like, like demand gen is short term leads, brand is long term leads. I know we'll go into a lot of that brand demand gen
Yeah.
dichotomy later, but if all you have is short term metrics, right? If all you have like is leads, right? And that's very common, right? We
Mm.
did another survey with a couple of my um, friends, and this was just on general B2B marketing and what metrics people use. And it was like crazy. There's still so many people that just use leads as their core metric. Not even like marketing
Mm.
qualified leads, not even like
Oh, wow.
pipeline or opportunity, like just leads, right?
Mm.
And sometimes, like, and I've been on a lot of boards now too. Like I serve as an advisor or sometimes an independent board member for some of these fast growing SaaS and AI companies. And occasionally you'll just get like a really dated board member that just
Mm.
doesn't kind of understand like what marketing's role is, or the metrics they have. And by the way, anyone that's in marketing knows this. Like everyone in the company, including the board, are all marketing experts.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's a
They
marketer.
all, yeah, they're all marketers. They all know how to do this. It's easy. You just
Right.
do this and this. I
Can't you just
never
like
go
do
to the
more webinars?
CTO
Yeah.
yeah, and tell them what back-end programming language they should be using, but they all are
Right.
happy to give us a lot of feedback. So I think, like, the biggest thing I'd say is, like, I was very lucky at a couple of these companies. like Slack in particular, I was really cognizant when I was going through the interview process. I really wanted to make sure all the C-suite and the board were really thinking beyond just traditional marketing metrics.
Mhm.
Like I'm a big experience guy, so I was thinking about like, hey, net promoter score,
Mm,
CSAT. I wanted to measure brand. I did that right off the bat. We started measuring, and not just for ourselves, but for our competitors.
okay.
We also measured, traditional like pipeline opportunity ARR. But we also had things like, daily active users, product qualified leads. Like
Hmm.
there's just a whole assortment of metrics that I think are um, incentivize better behavior within the marketing team, but also within the entire organization, right? And so
Yeah.
making sure that we had really strong alignment there with the board, the C-suite before I accepted the offer, right, was
Mm,
big for me. Because I think like a lot of times you may come in with like, I really believe in brand, or I really believe in the promoter score, whatever it is. But if no one else on the C-suite believes it, or certainly if no one on the board believes it, you're going to have
right.
a really hard time pushing that through.
Totally. Totally. And you mentioned a few independent board member positions, continue to advise some of these like next generation AI kind of companies. Are you seeing things changing in terms of how leaders at the board level, at the kind of CEO founder level are thinking about brand in this kind of new class of company?
I think a lot of them are being forced to think about it because, to be honest, Anthony, the biggest trend I see is there is such a proliferation of AI startups right now that I don't care what category you're in, there's a good chance you have 5 to 10 to 50 to 100 competitors,
Wow.
right? Like if you're in customer support AI,
Yeah.
probably 200 competitors, right?
Yeah.
And the biggest pain point that a lot of founders come to me with is like, hey, Bill, like, I think we've got a pretty cool product. It does this and this. It's really excellent, but no one knows about us, right? And when we talk to people, they've never heard of us before. There's dozens of other competitors that do something similar to what we do. How do we survive? So I think from that standpoint, kind of brand awareness, differentiation is
Mm,
becoming much more forefront. And I'd even argue like marketing is one of the most critical factors now for all these AI startups because if they have bad marketing or if they don't invest in brand, they don't invest in awareness, no one knows about them. And it's really hard to grow a business when no one knows about you.
yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The risk of falling into the sea of sameness or just being,
Yeah.
or worse, being irrelevant. Right. And I think that's
Yeah.
kind of a pretty existential risk.
And I'd even say along with that, right? Like most B2B companies, I don't know what it is. I think there's like this old risk averse behavior where maybe no one gets get fired. I get that, but it's like
Mm,
there is this playbook of every product has a white background, black text. Everyone
right.
uses acronyms. Everyone uses like this highfalutin sound and language. We're the next gen platform disrupting
Yeah.
XYZ. And the average like prospect has no idea what you do, right? They're like, wait, what do you do? Right.
Yeah.
There's no color, there's no unique tone and voice, there's
Yeah.
no moments of delight, there's no Easter eggs. Like a lot of stuff that's very common in B2C, like just is absent in B2B. So most B2B companies already sound and look exactly like their other dozen
Yeah.
competitors. And then when you take out like not really investing in brand, like you end up with some really unfortunate outcomes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, let's dive into the data because I think that's going to be instructive for folks listening to kind of figure out how to have these conversations kind of internally. You helped lead this research with 168 B2B CMOs. What question were you kind of personally trying to answer when you kind of kicked off this initiative?
Yeah, I think we originally, so I worked with Carolou, John Miller, and Ray Reich. Ray Reich runs a independent benchmarking service. And I just knew like when I was kind of going through all these different companies, like this data was just really hard to find, non-existent, or it cost
Yeah,
you like $1 million to get. And it was kind of like, hey, what if we just like all went on LinkedIn and just said, hey guys, like we're just fellow marketers. We want to hear what
yeah,
everybody's like. How do you tackle brand versus demand gen? What budget do you put towards it? Like, how do you track it? There wasn't any cost to get the research. There wasn't any cost to participate. We just all kind of contributed our time to help, promote it and get some
mm,
some weight behind it. So I think that's the first thing is like, at least for me, this was like kind of cool data. Like we're not some company that's selling you something that
Mm.
the results skew towards it. We were just literally like CMOs that were like, this is really hard, right? Like it would be nice if we had some benchmarks. And the other thing too, we knew like budgeting season was coming up and we were kind of like, hey, it'd be nice to actually have some benchmarks that, hey, overall industry, they're spending this much on brand, right? You know,
Yeah.
because that was always a common question I would get from startups I worked with. They're like, well, I don't know, how much do we spend on brand, right? Is
Yeah.
a million or 100 or like
Right.
50% of our budget? Or they, you know, there's just not like a lot of good data out there. So
It's true.
I think that was kind of the genesis behind it and kind of why we really wanted to, you know, all help out and get this data and kind of democratize it.
That's great. Yeah, you're right. There really isn't a lot of data around this. I think there's oh, I'm trying how to word this the right way, but like people can be passionate about this topic on LinkedIn
Yeah.
and say like really bold, convicting things that get a lot of likes and retweets. Like, but putting it into practice, getting approval, defending it to your CFO,
Yeah.
that's this is a hard conversation to
To
have,
your
and
board. Yeah.
to your board. And without data to kind of help make the claim or kind of, you know, bring people along for the journey, you're not, you know, ultimately it's not you know, going to go well. So I guess I
Yep.
commending you on doing this work on behalf of all of us to be able to have something to point to. I'm curious, when that initial kind of data first started coming back, was there a first kind of initial insight that made you stop and say like, okay, like this explains it, or this explains a lot of what I've been feeling, what I've been hearing from marketers, founders too.
Yeah, I mean, so it was interesting. We didn't kind of get a live ongoing pulse.
Mm,
Ray Reich, who runs the independent benchmarking service, by the way, great person if you ever want to run
love Ray.
some custom research. Yeah, he's awesome. Definitely give him a follow.
Yeah.
So he was like, no, we got to wait until all the data comes in until we start like, so I was like, all right, I'll wait here. But I would say probably one of the most shocking things that I saw was, I'm bringing up some of the stats here. Yeah, it was something like less than half of CMOs were even tracking brand at all, right?
Mm,
There was no brand tracking. And then the ones that were tracking it, um, and this is me coming from consumer where we measured brand a lot and we had a lot of sophisticated ways to measure it and metrics. The measurements that most B2B marketers were using it, the ones that did use it were really like superficial light ones. It
okay.
was like, hey, just how many branded search terms did we have, or was website traffic going up or not?
Mm,
Um, and it wasn't like some of the more, I don't know, I don't want to say advanced, but just like I didn't see things like aided recall or unaided recall, like share voice, share conversation, sentiment, you know, brand preference. There's like, again, when you get in consumer, like this stuff is like
right.
very common. And for whatever reason, like B2B, it never took off. You know,
Huh.
we can debate like what are those reasons, but so that was the first shocker for me, was like, holy cow, like most people aren't measuring this at all. And of the ones that are doing it, they're kind of using a little more lighter metrics that I think aren't going to really undergo heavy scrutiny.
Hmm. Interesting. And yeah, I think that the further I was, you know, digging into the data, it felt like there was this increasing kind of disconnect between what people believe and then what their behavior is, kind of what they're doing. Like not measuring brand is, you know, obviously a you know an important it's an important thing to measure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So we had that. So we asked people like, hey, what is your ideal budget shift? Or, you know,
mm,
or budget
yeah.
allocation? And it was basically like 50-50. You know, 50% demand, 40% brand. We had some other like small little
Okay.
categories there. But then when we asked them, hey, you know, what is your actual allocation? And it was like 70% demand and like 25% brand.
Huh.
7% demand, yeah, 25% brand. So there was obviously like this big disconnect, which was
Yeah.
kind of interesting. Well, you said like this is what you want to do, but you're not doing it here. So that was like one of the first big disconnects that we kind of noticed.
Do you think that's on the basis? I mean, I'm asking you to hypothesize, I guess, around what might be driving that. But do you think that's sort of CMOs who are believing in brand but not getting buy-in internally, or not getting kind of CFO approval, maybe because they're not measuring, you know, the impact of brand or have good kind of talk track? What are the things you think that are driving that disconnect?
Yeah, you know, we're hypothesizing at this point, but
Yeah.
my gut instinct doing this a long time is that there's a lot of scrutiny on marketing, right? We talked about everyone's a marketing expert, so
Hmm.
everyone has an opinion on marketing. A lot of scrutiny. Every C-suite position, the chief product officer, chief sales officer, chief support, chief CFO, the 5 or 6 board members, they all have a very strong opinion on marketing, right?
Yes.
And I personally think that when you are not tracking brand or tracking it very lightly, right? Um, you can't defend brand investments. They just get slaughtered in
Yeah.
um, the budgeting season. And when you can't definitively prove that our investment in brand yielded this much end ARR,
Right.
helped with our growth rate, helped with our retention, whatever it is, it's just hard. It's a knife fight in budget season, right? And
Yeah.
it's hard to defend it. So, ultimately, like I think too, it kind of contributes to it, Anthony, is like brand also, a lot of times the brand leaders, the best brand folks I've worked with are incredibly creative,
Yeah.
super like, great storytellers, visuals.
Mm.
They are not always like the best quants, right? That
Yeah.
can go in there and like,
Totally.
here's my CAC payback. And so like, it's not their first instinct to like, hey, how do we track all this? And,
Yeah.
how do we run a geographic split control group? And, I want
Right.
to have a monthly pulse and measure our competitor. It's just like, that's not their DNA. So if they don't do it, then it's like, well, is either the CMO doing it? And
Right.
again, a lot just haven't had experience with it. Sometimes the marketing ops team would do it, but that lack of DNA for the team responsible of it, I think a lot of times comes back and bites them because they don't have the metrics, they
Yeah.
can't justify it. And even sometimes when people do measure brand, what we found was it was so light. It was like a once a year survey, right? And I
Mm.
just kind of contrast that with what I call funnel metrics, which is visits, leads, MQLs, SQLs, pipe, close.
Right.
That is down to like, you know, daily
Yes.
100%. You can slice and dice it 1,000 different ways, see it right. So think of like the amount of time, energy, tech stack that
Yeah.
goes to create those numbers. And then you go to the brand side and it's like, oh, we ran a survey, I think like 2 years ago. And,
Oh my gosh.
we use this firm and it,
Yeah.
costs this much. It's just like there's no chance for that to sustain itself in a budget fight.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, when you put it that way. It's so true. An entire industry was born around the MQL. Our friend
Yep.
John and others like helping kind of build that. And yet we haven't seen that same kind of level of, I don't know, technology, mind share,
Yeah.
thought leadership to really kind of
Embracement.
lead
Yeah.
this conversation. The other thing that I hear a lot is, okay, well, like brand is a long-term play. We got a number to hit this quarter. Do you get a sense that that's part of the narrative that is
Yeah.
hurting the case of the CMO to get budget approval? Like is that even true, or can brand even drive short to medium term impact too?
Yeah. So interestingly, when I was at Slack, I think we had people that believed in it, but we're still a little like, I don't know. This is a
Mhm.
lot of money, Bill, right? And so I went out of my way when we started doing some of our bigger campaigns, because I was kind of like a data, and my dad was an engineer, so I always had like data in me, and I
Mm,
hated politics, and for me, like data was the antidote to politics. So I really started to think about like, well, how can I prove it to these guys, right? And
yeah.
one of the things we did was we did very disciplined geo tests. And so we would always have a control group, right? So we'd
Mm,
have, let's say we had 3 cities, similar in size demographics, and then another 3 sister cities. And so the 3 sister cities would get the campaign, they would get the Slack
okay.
campaign, right? And that could be everything from like out of home to like YouTube homepage takeovers to fill in the blank, right? Whatever your channel preference is. But
Yes.
they were more brandy ads, right? And I always say like a brand ad is one that's more, it's emotional. You're not
Hmm.
talking the whole time. It talks about the values or the feeling you get. A demand gen ad is like click here now, 7% off, first month free, very like transactional, right? So
Right.
we invest a lot in brand ads, but we would always have these geographic control groups. And when we wrapped up, we would look at, we were measuring brands. So we could say, okay, how much did our aided recall improve in these markets
Mm,
versus the control group? Because we were growing naturally. So you have to have that control group. But we also measured like the pipe, and we
mm,
measured like ASP and excuse me, all these different kind of traditional funnel metrics, leads and so forth. And what we found was that the cities that we ran these brand campaigns in also, like, all those funnel metrics also improved, right? The
Okay.
pipeline, the leads, everything else. And I actually think like there is a world where you kind of need both, right? There's that, hey, this is Slack, this is what we're about, these are all the cool things, like the motion, the feeling. And then you
Yeah.
have some ads that are like, oh, do you want to start now for free? Click here, right? Some more
Yeah.
demand gen type stuff. So we found that, hey, when you run these and maybe run them right, you can see a lift right off the bat to
Hmm.
your traditional leads and opportunities and funnel type metrics.
Interesting.
That being said, I do think like it is repeated though. A lot of this is like, first, I've seen some people that have done these brand investments and maybe they haven't seen the lift, and sometimes it's because they really peanut butter it. They'll like, oh, we only
Mm.
have like $1 million budget. Okay, we're going to run this all in US, every major city, but each person is going to see it maybe one time, right? Like
Right.
that's
Right.
that's just not enough. Like you need, like
Yeah.
most brand measurement stuff says, you need like 15 to 20 impressions before you get active recall.
Okay.
And so you kind of have to really think about the frequency capping and the investment. But I would say for us, like that short, long-term dynamic, even with brand, like it can play out. But again, you have to be really good at like the measurement and
Hmm.
using control groups and different ways to try to get that data.
Yep. Yep. And I'm curious if the 95-5 rule might apply here as well. And for those that are familiar with this research, basically the thesis is that 95% of a brand's audience is not actually in market for your products and services or in that
Yeah.
kind of broader category, but the 5% is. And I'm curious if kind of continuing to try to attempt those 15 impressions of the 95, adding value, giving away value, whatever the case is,
Yeah.
might help warm up that much bigger population, such that when they are ready to buy, they're going to think of your brand first. The active recall kicks in, and then they sort of get into the 5%. So I'm curious if there's maybe even a flywheel. It may not be
Yeah.
instantaneous, but
And that's a great point, Anthony. And one thing I think it's good to bring up with is that I think a lot of times too, maybe people outside of marketing think that brand is massive untargeted
yeah,
channel,
right.
right? They go to like, oh, it's the billboard on Highway 101 in Silicon Valley, or
Right.
it's the TV ad. And I think what I've tried to educate my internal stakeholders with is that, hey, there is incredible level of targeting now. Anyone that's on ABM knows, hey, you can target down to a company. And now it's
Mhm.
like with AI, you can target down to the individual, literally the individual, right? We could say, hey, Anthony, we want to run a campaign on you. Maybe I know your phone number, maybe I know your email address. That's enough where they can do
Mhm.
identity resolution. And I could show you ads when you go to YouTube, when you go to TikTok, when you go to LinkedIn, when you go to
Yeah,
Facebook or Instagram. So the targeting is there, right? And I think a lot of times targeting has only been used with the demand gen efforts.
right.
But I would argue, hey, with the brand stuff, you can now target that 5% in market, right? And you can
Mm.
saturate those folks. Like anyone that's sold enterprise knows it's not just one person. It's a committee of like 6 to 10 people,
Right.
finance, legal, procurements, line of business, C-suite. But imagine like being able to target those folks and saturating them with your brand. Like, hey, this is who we are. This is our category. This is what values we stand for, right? Maybe get them to laugh or smile a little bit because that tends to transfer onto your brand, right?
Yeah.
And then you go in with some demand gen ads, right? Like, okay, hey, maybe start with free trial now, or maybe, hey, we've
Mm.
got this new offering here. Like that can be incredibly powerful. But I do think like there's this old stated disconnect that like brand is just a billboard and you
Yeah.
can't be targeted and you're going to waste money on it, probably because people have wasted a lot of money. And like the new way of doing it, like it can be so effective.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Which actually bridges to this idea, thinking about brand again, not just as pouring money into like an endless bucket with maybe getting a result, but being much more targeted, effective, maybe even as a function of the broader kind of demand intention. The data showed though that when budgets are cut, 55% of leaders will fight to protect the demand budget, but then only 11% will fight to protect brand. And
Yeah.
so we've been circling around this. So, I think a lot's been said, but what does that tell you about how marketing kind of earns trust internally, or just kind of politics isn't the word maybe I want to use, but just how does one sort of like build relationships around this broader idea with their key internal stakeholders.
I mean, I think that stat totally makes sense, right? Like if you have a lot of leaders, marketing leaders that aren't tracking brand, um, they probably have internal stakeholders, sales, finance, C-suite, board, that also haven't been in organizations that have tracked brand within B2B specifically, right?
Mm.
Like, of course, when push comes to shove, tons and tons of short-term pressure for any startup out there. You're going to go with just what will actually move the metrics that you're tracking, right?
Right,
So
right.
I think that did make sense. I really think though that, I mean, the good is anyone that's listening to this, podcast, live stream, wherever you end up, watching or listening to this, like you're obviously like you're someone like, hey, I want to improve as a marketer, as a leader. I want to look at like what is a newer playbook, right? And
Mhm.
I really think like that cohort has the opportunity to really educate their stakeholders. Like, hey, like it's like we put a ton of weight on like daily active users
Mhm.
and net promoter score, and those are like two of our three Northern metrics were daily active users, net promoter score, and ARR, right? So, but two of them were like more of like a product like growth. One was more of a customer centric,
Mhm.
and that took a lot of time and energy on my half of like explaining to people why is it really important to measure net promoter score, right? Well, we want to grow really fast. We want to have a ton of people recommend us, and
Yeah.
NPS literally asks people how likely are you to recommend, right? So it's a really good proxy for how well we're going to grow organically. But that took a lot of time and energy, right? And I do think in marketing, probably the biggest mistake I've seen from a lot of leaders, myself included in my earlier years, was I just did marketing and
Mhm.
I didn't spend any cycles educating all these other stakeholders outside of marketing what marketing was, what our metrics were, why we were pursuing these, why it's
Yes.
important, right? And not just internally to the company, but also the board members too, right? Like those are they have so much power and sway.
Yeah.
So I do think like the folks are listening here and maybe going, hey, I believe in brand. Well, I want to get it. Like, okay, well, how are we going to measure this? How do we get like a monthly cadence going? How do we choose the right brand metrics? How do we start measuring your competitors? Which, by the way, is awesome. If you measure your competitors, you instantly get a like a very competitive side that comes out from the founders and the like, well, we can't let competitor X, they're higher than they're growing fast. Like we got
Right.
to change our mix here, right? But when you don't have any of that, it's just kind of like in the darkness, you don't
Yeah.
kind of instill it there. So I do think
Yeah.
like a huge part of this at the end of the day too is just internal education. It's thought leadership, it's championing these ideas that hey, there is a different way to run a business, to run an
Yeah.
AI startup or a SaaS startup.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is that this is almost like the way you should start any new role in is like do this kind of tour, if you will, with spend time with your founder, spend time with your sales leader, your customer success leader, and align. I would think like approaching it from a place of like learning and humility and all that, but then as you're sort of gaining conviction, and if brand is a big part of it, which I hope it is, have those conversations and set those expectations up front. That feels like a good, again, whether you're an early stage business or kind of more mature.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the first step was so when I was like the first step, like I was hired as kind of maybe around 50 people. I was hired as a CMO. And as I built out my team, literally the first thing we did was start measuring brand, right? We
First thing.
ran first thing, aided and unaided recall studies. We used SurveyMonkey at the time. And the idea is pretty easy. You're like, okay, what are people that are in our demographics, tech
Yeah.
workers, this age group, this demographic, whatever. And they had like a 30 million panel. And we just asked, all right, send it out to them and go, hey, when you think of like team communication software, which ones do you think of? That's
Yeah.
unaided, right? You don't give them any hints. And then aided, you can follow up with, okay, well, of the following, like Slack and HipChat and Microsoft Teams, which one have you heard of? And then you can run little branches, right? Oh, you've heard of HipChat. Like, what is your perception towards them? Very favorable, very unfavorable, right? Or you heard of Slack. What is your perception, right?
Mm.
And interesting things we found was like in Silicon Valley when I joined, everyone knew about us. The minute we went outside of that, no one knew about us, right?
Oh
Like,
wow.
yeah, like you're pretty humbled. You're like, whoa, we have a 3% aided recall. That's pretty low. That means
Yeah.
like
Wow.
97% and not be able to pick us out, even when we listed our name there. Um, but like it was a monthly cadence. We did every month. And so the great news is, we had 6 or 7 data points by the time we finally were like, hey, let's start investing in brand, right? And then I could show like, well, here is our natural growth rate. Well, we did the brand one. Look, our aided awareness
Mm,
really spiked, and we could even get it down to like a point of awareness cost us X amount of dollars, right?
wow.
Um, but I think, yeah, I think it comes really early. And then again, I always viewed my role as a leader, I'd say, but like almost 50% of my time I dedicated towards educating these stakeholders, doing road tours within the
Yeah.
company, meeting with board members, right? Like, hey, here are our core metrics. Here's where maybe they're a little bit different than the classic just funnel metrics. Here's why in marketing we have brand is a big thing to measure. And oh, by the way, I think brand is larger than just marketing, right? Like our pricing and
Yes.
packaging, like, and you're talking about freemium models. Well, that's going to impact how many people know about you, right? Versus a very
Yeah.
closed, we only sell to enterprises at 8-figure type thing. So like all these things kind of intermix, and I found the most success personally just when I devoted those cycles. And I just, my early career, I would just sit at my desk and like really try to nail marketing, but like later
Yeah.
on I'm like, shoot, I got to educate all these other stakeholders
Yeah.
on what marketing is, expectations, metrics, and why we're doing what we're doing.
And how it's changing as we're
Yeah,
going.
absolutely, right.
Um, yeah, I'm really glad you brought up that very practical idea of how to measure brand. You, the example you gave with SurveyMonkey, because I imagine a lot of folks might be listening. If you're an enterprise CMO, if you're kind of kind of mid to late stage, like, all right, do I need to hire like a firm to do this? Like, do I need the budget to justify it? But if you're an earlier stage founder or a first time marketer, you're like, I'm measuring brand. Like, I'm trying to survive. But that was a very like practical idea for how you can do this at the earliest stages of business,
Yeah,
not just yeah.
and I think like when you rewind 30 years back, it used to be really, really expensive to get this data, right? Like they would literally hire teams of people that would walk around airports and try to find decision
Wow.
makers and ask them, a 40-page questionnaire. And it would cost you 100,000, 200, 300,000 for one survey, right? And so
Yeah.
I think like anything, things have changed and it's a lot
Yeah.
easier. And we were using SurveyMonkey 10 years ago, but there's even easier solution that like, I don't know if anyone you watch YouTube videos, you will occasionally see
Yeah.
the ads will go, hey, have you heard of this company before? Right.
Right.
Like they're asking a aided recall survey, right? And
Wow.
again, we talked about certainly anytime you're talking online, incredible targeting, incredible demographics that you can essentially run these surveys towards. So the costs has come tremendously down. The channels where you can run these are much more available.
Mm.
And again, now it's like feasible where you can start measuring these very early in your startup's life. You can get regular monthly pulses of where you're at, and you can also see your competitors. Because again, when you run these
Yeah.
surveys, they list the competitors. You
Right.
see how many people know them as well. So that's like super insightful data.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about the impact or let's talk a little bit of the demand revenue side of the equation here, because the research showed that only 28% of companies say that they can directly tie brand investment to pipeline. This has been like a huge problem for marketing to solve. We've spoken at length about the brand measurement side of it. Do you see using more of the B2B terminology and language, like, do you see a connective tissue or an easy way for us to connect aided recall, these types of concepts, with MQLs, top of funnel
Yeah.
growth, pipeline coverage? Like, I'm curious how you see sort of the how we talk to our sales counterparts, perhaps, about the impact of all of this.
Yeah, it's a really tricky question, right? So predominantly in B2B, most people have used I wouldn't even argue multi-touch attribution. They've used first or last attribution, right?
Mm.
So most of the attribution modeling inherently doesn't catch brand, because a lot of times brand you see it but you don't click on it, right? Like most attribution you need to click to like put it in their attribution modeling. The other side of it, which is more common on B2C, but some B2B are using, is mixed media modeling, where they will
Okay.
go through and they'll look at all of your investments and they'll run it against tons of regression and AI algorithms. And they'll go, hey, this investment yielded this increase in it. So there are technical solutions for it. I think the easiest, and it's a pretty bulletproof way to do it, is what I described earlier for everyone that doesn't maybe have the tech or can't
Yeah.
afford it. just run geotests, right? Invest brand only in certain cities, states. If you're global, invest some in just some regions or countries, right?
Hmm.
Like maybe France and the UK gets a massive brand push, our APAC, our, LATAM, North America doesn't get any of it. And let's see, like, hey, did that increase their brand metrics, but also did that increase their funnel, their pipeline metrics, right? And can we make
Yeah.
that correlation there? Um, so, or another way, like I say for a lot of B2B marketers, like you're most likely doing ABM if you're selling into the enterprise, right? And
Mm.
so a lot of times ABM, you'll say, here's my top 100 accounts we're going to go after. Um, have the discipline to say, okay, we're going to run this brand campaign towards them, but only we're going to have 20% that never get it. So 20% of this top 100 aren't going to
Okay.
get the brand campaign. The other 80% are going to get it, 50-50, whatever you want, right?
Right.
And then measure it like 3 months later, 6 months later. Okay, what were the average deal sizes of the ones that got the brand campaign? What was the average deal velocity? Did it compress there, right?
Mm.
Choose whatever funnel metric du jour you like, right? How many more opportunities did we get? How much more pipeline? How much more closed
Yeah.
revenue? Whatever it is, right? And then measure it against the control group. That can be incredibly powerful. And my instinct has always been like that's the right way. But what I've seen in practice is marketing teams don't want to do that. They just want to roll it out to everything. Like even when I was at Salesforce, I remember we were putting in a new homepage and everybody liked the new homepage and this is great. And I was like pleading with my team. I'm like, can we please make another page to test it against? I know
Mm.
this one, everybody, the hippos, highest paid opinions love it, but let's just have like another page, right? And I couldn't even get that through. There was so much pressure to get this out. But at least what I said was, okay, when we release this, we're only going to do like 50% of the new visitors get the new version, 50% get the old version. So at least we can like see what's the lift in time spent on sites and leads that came from clicking on a demo form. But like having that like a little bit more scientific discipline, I think, to sometimes just have a control group that doesn't get this stuff can be
Yes.
really compelling ammo for you when you do have to like at the end of the day like present like, hey, did this stuff work or not? Because I think historically what happens is, sorry, I'm going on a rant here.
No, this
You
is
got me
great.
all
This is
riled up.
important.
This is brand stuff. You got me riled up. Historically, what happens is we're like, let's do brand. I like brand. You like brand. Yeah, marketing. We love brand. Let's do it. We're going to spend 5 million on this, right? Great.
Yeah.
Let's do it. No control group, no measurement. And then they go to at some point, hey, when's the next board meeting? Okay, Bill, you're up, right? Like tell them what lift this made. And you can't defend
Right.
it, right? Maybe even sales did go up, but they're like, well, how do we know it was that? It could have been this
Right.
happened, this happened, this happened, right?
There was a trade show. There was like this,
Yeah.
like other
And
things.
then now you have this virtuous loop where so many people have done that. Leaders have the shortest tenure of any C-suite, right?
Right.
Cycling through. Now these board members, CFOs, are getting skeptical. They're like, oh man, I don't know. Last time I remember Joe wanted to run this campaign and we wasted all this money and I never saw an impact. And
Yeah.
it's this virtuous cycle. And I think that feeds into it too.
Mm. Yeah. We got to go find a demand oriented CMO now, or whatever the case is. This whole brand illusion. That's awesome. Yeah. And the other piece I think that was super compelling of the data, and this one hits close to home with Gainsight a little bit, is a lot of what we've been talking about, at least maybe in my head as I've been like hearing the conversation, has been around like net new customer acquisition, pipeline creation,
Yes.
new logo growth. But the report showed that only 10%, about 10% of marketing effort goes to expansion, even though 40% of growth comes from existing customers. And so this is, I think, nearly universal, this idea that marketing is under investing in expansion motions, supporting kind of driving NRR kind of more broadly. Do you see a role for brand there as well? Not just for driving, again, unaided top of funnel awareness, but like relationship and intimacy and value and loyalty with our existing customer base.
Absolutely. And I would say to your much earlier question, like what thing shocked you? That one was another one that was like, oh my God, like only
Yeah.
10% are putting any budget weight towards existing customers. Cause I grew up when I came to SaaS and I grew up with like Salesforce, like half our revenue came from add-on upgrade expansion,
Mm,
right? So if you kind of think like, hey, just where's revenue coming from? Where should marketing spend cycles? You would instantly be like, well, half our time and energy should be spent on, you know, top of funnel prospects, and half of should be spent on existing customers. But that's not the case. And then again, well,
right.
why? And I always go back, well, what is the metric that's incentivizing people? And the
Right.
biggest metric for marketing teams is leads, right? So of course, like anything past the lead, they don't spend time on, which also makes no sense to me because I'm like, marketing, we're really good. We're creative. We're good at creating segments and groups and running campaigns towards them in an automated fashion, like very very capital efficient way to message, nurture, educate these folks throughout the entire journey.
Mm,
When we stop at prospects, that means everything after that is one-to-one knife fights. It's sales trying to all through one-to-one try
right.
to educate, nurture, and sell this person. And then when their existing customer, like most SaaS or AI companies, you eventually you have multiple product lines, they're doing other things. You want to be able to educate them. Hey, we're more than what we did 5 years ago. We're very different, educate,
Yes.
nurture, cross sell this or that. So all that goes away when you just stop at lead, right? So I do think, yeah, brand can play a huge role in to your existing customers. And I love Gainsight, by the way. Gainsight's
Okay.
awesome. I know Chuck, we used to work together at
Yeah, that's
Salesforce.
right.
He's
That's right.
fantastic. And I love your guys' mission, right? Like I think I've spoken at previous conferences
Mm,
with Gainsight. And just because like I think people ignore that part and it's
yeah.
just like, oh, that's just customer success. And I'm like, well, marketing, can also help too with these folks and educate and nurture them. And I think brand has a big part of that. I know at Zendesk for us, a big thing we did was we used a lot of our paid channels to also message and educate existing customers,
Mm,
right?
okay.
Because we have multiple product lines and hey, did you know we did this? Or here's a really cool thing this customer's doing. Like maybe you should explore it. Or, here's a really piece of cool content that we made for prospects. But you as customers probably would like this too, right? It might help
Yeah.
you out. So I think that's a huge miss for a lot of marketing orgs. Again, I think it just goes back to metrics.
I
And
think you're right.
there's an old way to do B2B, and it was marketing was just leads. And
Yeah.
there's so much more that marketing can do, should do, but you have to do that. You got to re-examine all these metrics and educate all these stakeholders, which is a
Yeah.
pretty, daunting task.
And so much of it, even I guess maybe as a function of those metrics, is the conventional wisdom around sales marketing alignment, which is
Yep,
important. Don't get us wrong, but where's the conversation around sales, chief customer officer
totally.
alignments? Increasingly so, sales, sorry, marketing and CCO, but also marketing and your product leader. I'm
Absolutely.
curious. You of course have the PLG kind of background and context, but in this new world, like products are becoming hyper technical, like much more technical, and onus is on us as marketers to understand the innovation at a much greater depth than maybe we had to in the past. Not just across product marketing, but just across what our customers are buying and valuing and how we tell that story. I know we didn't have this in our prep or anything, but I'm curious, like, do
No,
you see this increasingly kind of marketing product relationship becoming more important in this kind of intelligence era that we're now in?
absolutely. And I would say I always try to look at the world from like the customer or just the person that's using the product. Like they don't see all these like artificial functions that are split into different areas, right? They just have
Yeah.
one experience, right? And when you maybe challenge what these teams should be doing, the metrics they have, or even challenge if these should be functional metrics or shared company metrics, the behavior really changes, right? So,
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Like at Slack, again, we had daily active users and net promoter score. Really, I really pushed the net promoter score. When those were two of our biggest metrics, we shared them. All the teams shared in it,
Right.
right? I remember we had a company goal one quarter. We were like, if Slack hits 5 million DAUs, everybody gets a week off. And I remember at the
Nice.
time, Stuart and I were talking about it. And he's like, there's no way we're going to hit this. It's like, it was one of those aspirational, like, but oh
Yeah.
my God, every single, how do we get more people not only finding about psych, but using it more, coming back more often. And how do we improve this? And how do we improve that? And this is like sales helping out, marketing helping out, finance helping out,
Yeah.
legal made their terms of service easier, right? Like product made the onboarding simpler, and marketing helped
Wow.
out with that. And we made more moments of delight. And it was like this flywheel, right? And we all worked together. And I just think like, you know, marketing increasingly it needs to work with product, right? And I'd even argue a lot of those metrics should be the same, right? They should be sharing these metrics,
Yeah.
because like all too often I see when I work with these different companies, especially more established, like sometimes I'll work with like series A or B, but sometimes I'll work with like DEF or public $1 trillion company. And like there, it's like these teams, these functions don't even work with the other teams at all.
Mhm.
Maybe there's like a quarterly check-in, but there's no cross pollination. And so, marketers are good at like fun and simple and moments of delight. And yeah, you want to insert that into your onboarding. You want to
Right.
make a couple functions that they do, maybe when you finish the first sales forecast, they get a high five, nice job, right? Or I remember at Slack, we would have a lot of our marketers would write the dialogue within the product, right?
Right.
Not the back end developer writing the onboarding flow, but have the marketer write that, right? Like make it a
Yeah.
little fun and witty and, have a conversation, right? Like those things all
Yeah.
matter. But if marketers never deal with product, or again, if they only deal with top of funnel leads and beyond, they will never, ever go into the product, which is just a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Bill, I can't thank you enough for sharing just some context behind this research, sharing your lived experience and wisdom and passion for this topic. Where can folks follow along with you? But then also, where can folks dig into this research and actually kind of unpack it, maybe build some slides to take internally and have some conversations around it?
Yeah, if you want to follow along with me, if you just want to hear Bill rant on all these marketing topics, I have a YouTube channel,
Nice.
SaaS CMO Pro. Just go to YouTube, search SaaS CMO Pro, and you'll see it. And I literally go on and on about all these PLG and brand and all these different topics here. If you want to see the research, just follow me on LinkedIn, Bill Macaitis. Send me a note, send me a message to say I want to see the report. And I'm happy I can send you the 62-page detailed report on this. And again, like we did that just so other marketers would have a little bit more ammo firepower when they were, going to budgeting season, or just to see what your peers were doing. So happy to share that research with you.
Awesome. Well needed. Again, like I think you've done a service on behalf of the industry as well to arm us with this content, with this data and benchmarking. So thank you for that, and the folks you partnered with. I think a lot of folks are going to be are going to find that valuable as they kind of go forward.
Yeah, my pleasure. No, I love the topic. Thank you for having me, Anthony. I had a lot of
Yeah.
fun today.
Awesome. Likewise. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And we'll have this episode published over the weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone next week. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.